Today, we're talking to CTO and author Alan Williamson about the most valuable lessons from his latest book, Think Like a CTO. You're listening to Joel Beasley, Modern CTO.
We'll just jump right into it, Alan. I found you because I was looking for books that people were writing about thinking like a CTO, being a CTO. I've been studying the space for a decade, and I just saw your book. Did it recently come out within the past year or so?
Yes, last June.
Why did you decide to write this book?
It's a great question. So basically, I've been involved with helping CTOs and VP of Engineerings evolve through my work in the private equity space. So in the private equity space that I work in, Joe, we're bringing first-time companies into the ecosystem of PE. And from that perspective, these are well-established companies. 5 times out of 10, the CTO isn't really being a CTO. It's just simply that they're the most senior developer that was there and they know the platform the most and they've evolved up through it. So part of my role was to help professionalize the sort of soft skills that a CTO needs to do outside of what they're already doing with engineering. And that is sort of a CTO, it's not a broad sweep, but most engineers, we suck at talking to other non-engineers. We descend into buzzwords, we descend into technical jargon quickly. We generally are very passionate people. We don't present terribly a great argument. We're always presenting left or right. Our nuances is a little bit caught up in that. And part of sort of my role was to help educate what does a CTO do in a growing, evolving company that has a board of directors, has a suite of investors? What are they needing from you? How do you present yourself to a board? How do you manage a budget? How do you manage things like security, compliance, making sure that you've got a technical stack that can go through diligence without any problems whatsoever that may impinge what a company can do in the future? And what I found, Joel, I kept saying the same things over and over and over again. And one of the things that I realized was that there is very little help in this space for an emerging VP of engineering or a CTO that's ready to take that next step. If you're a CEO or a CFO, you can go into Barnes & Noble and you're completely inundated in the number of leadership books that are focused in and around that. You're also inundated for books at a VP of engineering level looking down in terms of how do I run an engineering team? How do I build an engineering team? How do I do project management? All the things looking down the way. But there was a huge gap looking up and looking out. And that's where I sort of said, okay, I'm going to write a book for me that I needed 10 years ago, that I would have loved somebody to come in and say, right, here's pretty much the full gamut that you need to run. And I sat down, I spoke to many other CTOs that had gone through the same sort of stuff. I said, okay, what are the sort of the big topics that you wish you'd known about? And so I basically wrote down 15 chapters. Now, each chapter could be a book in itself, go deeper. It's a book that doesn't have a story arc throughout, so you can jump into each chapter as and when you need to. I mean, not all chapters are relevant for everybody. But the goal there was to sort of lay down the landscape and say, hey, this is what you need to be thinking about. You've got the engineering bit down pat. Fine, great, wonderful. Now we need to make you far more accessible to non-technical people.
So you spend a lot of your time mentoring CTOs on talking to non-technical people.
Yes, right? That's probably the biggest part of it, is trying to help an engineer communicate their ideas in such a way that a CEO or a CFO, which are two of the most important pieces on the chessboard, who are maybe not technically orientated, to allow them to be part of that conversation. Okay? So whatever it is that you're trying to do will inevitably always require money and time. The CFO is the one that's going to determine how much budget you really do have and will make you accountable for the money you're spending. And the CEO is the one that's going to give you the time to be able to do it. And from that perspective, you need to be able to talk in their language as to the consequences of why am I spending $3 million in this particular project? Why am I spending $100 in this particular service? Whatever the numbers are. Why do I need to spend 6 months in this? Why can't I get it done in 3 months? Why can't I get it done in 12 months, etc.? What if I was to give you twice the development team? Could you do it in half the time? All of these sort of conversations have to be had in a way that does not involve descending back into buzzwords and allowing them to be able to contribute to the conversation in a meaningful manner.
What are the mistakes that you see other than buzzwords? And like, what are some of the actual, do you have any good stories, like actual mistakes that you've seen happen?
Sometimes they'll sort of get a little bit frustrated and sort of say, just trust me, because they can't find a way to articulate what it is they're looking for. We often see, for example, languages that were probably a little bit too leading edge or bleeding edge to have been really chosen as a primary language. And what's happened is that, the company has basically outlived the language. And now we're at a point whereby I can't find engineers for it, and I'm at the dreaded rewrite conversation, whereby, we should have gone with blah instead of blah. Typically in today's environment, it's usually the JavaScript frameworks that are turning over so quickly. So one has to be very conscious that, while going with, say, like a Vue or a React may not be as sexy now compared to some of the other ones that are popping up, it will still be around because they're backed by large companies. Likewise, nobody's ever going to turn an eye if something's written in, say, Node or Java, but we may start to raise eyebrows if something's written in, say, Ruby or Go, for example. It just hasn't quite got the mainstream traction yet. But that's more at a macro level. Other sort of big decisions that CTOs haven't really grasped terribly well is budgeting. Perfect example is ask an average CTO, have you got the right number of engineers in your group? And they'll inevitably say, no, I could always do with more. I say, okay, can you quantify that? Show me through data why you think you need more engineers. And then they struggle. They struggle to sort of articulate
I'm going to pull
data.
that email out from the sales lead that sold a feature that didn't exist.
There could be that.
That's why I need it.
But that's a great point, Joel. It's like, okay, prioritization. A CTO has to say no. A CTO has to be able to say, okay, we got to prioritize. Here are the options. Okay, and that's a perfect use case to talk through. A good CTO will be able to go to their management or their executive level and say, hey, you've asked for all of this. I can't deliver all of this, so you're going to have to help me prioritize. Instead of making me choose what it is. But I have to give you the options and the consequences of each of those options. Right? And they'll just, but I need it all. I said, well, that's fine. I want the body of Jason Statham, but it's not going to happen. Right? No matter how much I dream.
Hold on a second, it might.
It won't. I hit that Peloton hard every day. It's not happening. But to have that strong personality, Joel, to be able to stand in front of your executive and say, guys, I know you're shouting to have it all, but you can't. You can't. And even if we were to hire new developers, it's going to take at least a month, maybe 3 months by the time they're onboarded, they're found, they're recruited, they're onboarded, and they're actually knowledgeable in the company stack. So that's not a short-term fix. So we got to decide as a group. We got to decide as an engineer. And you can't come back to me in a week's time and then change the goalposts on me again. And that's where a lot of sort of the mentoring happens, is figuring out the sort of project management out the way as opposed to inside your own group.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, it's there. What you're describing is lessons that I've learned. And they're awkward conversations to have. Nobody likes to say no to anybody. It's against our human nature to say, no, sorry. Well, yeah,
But
you don't want to be Mr. No. You don't want to be the guy that like people think that you're going to say no. So you have to do what you said, right? You have to come to them and say, hey, I don't know. Here's the list. Help me organize this list, and then you're involving them and you're basically having them. I picked up this skill with client work, right? When I was building apps for clients, they would just call me up. I've got this idea. Great. Yes, we're going to do it. Like, we should definitely make that happen. But where does it sit in the plan? And here's the amount it'll take. And are you able to write the check? And so, you would put it back on them. But you would still, it's a hard thing to do because you have to hold the line. You have to help them be a part of the decision making. And you also have to be joyful or at least like not a dick about it.
Yes. And that's where you need to be led by data. That truly is the sort of stuff. And to try and figure out what is a throughput of an engineer, what is the throughput of a QA person, all of the different ingredients that make up an engineering team, they all pull in the same direction in terms of they all need to complete their job to be able to get a feature out or a product out. And simply turning the tap on to produce more in each area doesn't necessarily increase
well,
the
it's like,
throughput.
what do you, and yeah, because if you turn the tap on to increase more to build something, it's like, well, then how is that connected to revenue, right? Like, how is it really far away from value to the end user, or is it really close to value to the end user?
Yeah, and I think that's where, as we think about the budgeting aspect of what a CTO does, and budgeting also means basically costing as well, which is, okay, here's what I think I'm going to spend, but here's what I did spend. And marrying up those two, at the end of every month, you can sort of say, okay, I thought I was going to spend 100,000 this month, but I only spent 90. Great. Why? Okay. Well, this person was off in that particular time. Okay. But whatever it is, a lot of CTOs don't seem to have a true handle on the costs of their own department. And that's not just human capital. That's everything that they sort of go through. And it's just one of the first few questions that we ask as we onboard a company inside of this space is, okay, what's your production costs? What's your development costs? What's your true R&D costs? What's your subscription costs? What is your recruiting budget? How often are people recruiting in your organization?
Always.
All of that sort of stuff. Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. You're always recruiting. How much time do you spend paying down technical debt? All of this has to be factored into the overall big budget. So, and that is always, you've been there yourself, I'm sure, whereby we'll not do the technical debt sprint this week. We'll push it next week because I've got this feature I need to get out. But all you're doing is you're incurring more interest on the interest you've already owed, so your technical debt gets worse. it's that one that always gets kicked down the can. So again, a strong CTO is the guy that says no. Is the one that says, no, I cannot let this one slip this sprint. It's got to be done. Otherwise, we're going to have a bigger problem at a later date. And I'm going to have to shut down the whole production system in order to get this bit right.
I'd say that the weakest muscle that I encounter with just like random CTOs would be their ability to they fall in love with what they want to do, or like what they want to work on and what they think the software needs in relation to the software. And I think that's the mistake. I think they need to spend more time with the head of sales and marketing and the CEO and all be rowing in the same direction on like, what are we trying to achieve as an organization? Because then that puts the technical debt into perspective. You know, it lets you make decisions versus if you're just a really good product person and now you're the product leader, you're going to solve the problems with like product stuff. Like, you gotta develop these new business skills of figuring out what direction everyone's rowing in and then being a value add to that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a beautiful point. There's definitely a strong cohort that simply don't even know what the end customer is doing or what the end customer's problems that they're needing to do. Because at the end of the day, you're just a tool for them to build a business on top of you, right? So you got to understand what they're trying to do with the tool. And I'm a strong believer that you've got to know what your end customer is doing. It's not to say you do everything your end customer asks you to do, but you got to have empathy for them. You truly got to be in their shoes to figure out, okay, where is my platform causing you friction? Where is my platform helping you excel? And is that friction an acceptable loss at the moment, but will suddenly become an impediment whereby you may actually leave us as a customer, right? And to understand that full makeup will allow you to have a much stronger conversation with head of sales, head of marketing, the CEO, the CFO, etc. Because now you're talking in their language. Now you're talking in terms of the end customer, irrespective of what framework, what cloud platform, what database, what schema. They don't give a crap about that. They just want to know that it's going to work and it's going to scale as the business grows.
One of my favorite questions to ask CTOs is, how much time do you spend with your customers? And what answers do you usually get? I get a range. So I'll get like virtually none, or, I should be doing that. A lot of people will know what they should be doing, but not do it. So I get a lot of like, not that I talked to a customer here or there. Or another one I get a lot is, when we were first starting out, I was talking to customers all the time, but then we started hiring a bunch and engineering got crazy. And so I haven't gotten to spend time with customers in a while. And then there's the good response, which is like, I spend a third of my time with customers, right? I think that's a pretty good amount of time to spend with customers. And then the question from there becomes, some people are saying, oh my God, a third of time with customers. It's like, it's just my personal belief is that should be something you do. But then the question becomes well, if I'm spending a third of time with customers, how am I going to be able to A, B, C? And then a lot of times what's happening is their mind is imagining that they're spending time with the same set of customers. But what should happen is your company should be growing. So you should move your window up. So you should spend your time with your top 10% of customers, because then there's a revenue component to it. Then it's like,
or even know who your top 10 customers are. I mean, that's a data point that a lot of people simply don't know. It's like, who is our big ones? And conversely, who are the customers that are costing us the most in terms of the amount of support they need or the amount of help that they always need? And is that because they just don't get it, or have we failed them in not providing the necessary tools to help them self-serve?
Yeah.
And you're right, that delta of not knowing what is huge, and that should shape your vision, which brings me on to another sort of small litmus test that I always do to determine, are you a CTO or are you a CTO in name only? Which is, I put them in front of a whiteboard, give them a black marker, give me your vision. Draw me your vision. Those that can't do the vision, they're a VP of engineering. Those that can do the vision have or are a CTO.
Yeah.
Because you've got to be able
there's
to
tools
know.
for that too, by the way. There's tools to learn how to visionary tools. I think I wrote something like 10 years ago called like the Visionary CTO, and I bullet pointed out some tools to help people with their imagination.
I'm a huge mind map person for that sort of stuff. But to be able to lay out your vision in a heartbeat without preparation is what defines a good CTO from a poor CTO. Because you should always be selling that vision, and every decision that you make, every decision that every person inside of your group should know what that vision is. And does that get me closer to the vision, or does it get me further away from the vision? And usually if they do present a great vision, through other conversations, I'll be asking various other members of their team, hey, what is the vision of the group? To see how well they've communicated that vision. Is everybody marching in the same direction? And is everybody bought in to that vision? And have you allowed for voices to challenge you on that? And, I've come across a lot of bad CTOs where fundamentally they're the only voice in the room because they've said it Therefore, it's decreed that this is the way we're doing it. And did you pull any input in from anybody? No. Because again, that ego has kicked in by saying, well, I've got the title, so therefore I know everything.
Here's a fun one. I do networking calls. So I have emails that go out every single day. Just I contact like 100 new CTOs every day. And I'll say, hey, let's do a 15-minute networking call. And then in these calls, I'm sometimes like asking them questions to figure out where they sit in the stack. One of those questions is I ask them if they understand how paychecks are made. You would be surprised at the number of employees. They think that there is a magical paycheck fairy. They've never thought about it. 80% of the people I've ever asked this question to have never even thought about it. They think you get a job, you get a number for doing a job, and like that's just magic. It's what the market pays, is what they'll say. It's what the market pays. That's how they come up with the number for the job. Yeah. So I ask people, do you understand how paychecks are made? And the reason why I think it's important, and I'm kind of a broken record with this, but like, if you understand that people are giving you money in exchange for making their lives better, then you can say, okay, that's the value exchange. You're giving money for me making your life better, whether that's processing a queue faster or building whatever it is. And then once you understand that reason, and there's usually 2 or 3 reasons why they're handing you the money, then you can orient yourself towards doing those things better, right? And you can then justify, be like, you know what? I was going to have this team to do A, B, or C, but that's not even why people pay us. And that'll provide a marginal benefit over here. But like, we could reallocate this $500,000 a year to just doing these things better. And then that'll make everybody happy. But until you understand how paychecks, and that's how you can justify. It's like when I made the claim, I think you should spend a third of your time with your customers. The reason why is because it's incredibly justifiable, especially if you're in a tech product where they're relying on you and trusting you and doing huge deals with your company. You need to have a presence with them. It's going to be how you build trust and retain the customer. And when you look at your salary, you're like, yeah, a good portion of the way my salary happens is because of that.
We're birds of a similar feather. I mean, you heard me at the start of the podcast when I said to Josh, you earned your salary today. I mean, it's one of the questions I always ask people is, when you go home at night, do you feel you were worth your money? Would you have written the check to you if you were a contractor coming into your business? Did you earn your salary today? And it's not that I want people to always be conscious of how much they cost or how much it's more about, are you sure you're still contributing? Are you still enjoying this? Is this a two-way street here? And are you truly getting it? But it does feed into the overall, get a metric on your overall operating budget. And, you know, it's the sort of, yeah, I've chosen SQL Server and I'm now spending maybe 6 figures sending those money to Microsoft every year just for the sheer privilege of using SQL Server. What if I didn't do that and I chose something else? Could I get another person instead? Yes, that's what economics is all about. That's knowing where your dollars are going. We sometimes get a little bit complacent by saying, oh, that SQL Server budget, that's not my money. I'm spending the company's money. I said, no, we're spending our money. And is our money going in the right place? I would love 2 more engineers instead of the Oracle license I'm giving away. Or if I get the right DevOps person, do I need that support contract because this person knows as much about that particular platform or that particular software that I'm going to get at the other end of a phone call? So it's trying to figure out where is the money best placed. And at the end of the day, the company is looking to you as a CTO to make those correct, educated decisions. And if you do decide that SQL Server is indeed what you need, can you justify that to the CFO that you're needing to spend X thousands of dollars a month on SQL Server licenses? What is that getting the company in return?
In return and in relation to what their objectives are.
Yes. And saying it's the only database I know is not an acceptable answer.
Yeah, you know, I never thought about that, actually. There is a huge disconnect between first-time CTOs and their CFO, CEO counterparts, because it's just the skills that got you to product lead or whatever it is are not the same skills that you need to interact with the executive team.
Yeah, and they usually ask you the questions that you think, can I go away and think about that? Because you've really hit me with an interesting one. And that is one of the pieces of advice I give to people is, if the CFO hits you with a question that feels you intimidated or you feel out of your water, it's okay to say, I'm going to come back to you on that one. I need to give this thought. That's an okay answer too.
That is an okay answer.
Because you want to be the guy that gives it a bit of thought as opposed to always off the top of your head.
And if you're with the right team and you're doing something worth doing, those questions are going to come up. The problem I do see happen rarely, but I do see it, is people who don't know how to say they don't know.
We come back to our ego thing again, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's beyond me. I do a lot of interviews. So literally in many interviews, what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the edge of my knowledge. And I can tell that like some people will, and we edit the interviews and everything, like some people won't admit that we've hit the edge and they give me weak answers or like fluffy stuff. But then some people, when I hit the edge, they're like, oh, that's just beyond my, you see it like the CTO of like Verizon and like at the top level of like business and competency, they'll just be like, I don't know that. I'm more geared in this area or whatever it may be. But they get really good at explaining how they don't know. So they don't sound dumb like, oh, I don't know. They do it correctly.
Yeah. And I mean, particularly like each little area has their own vocabulary. And I'll often find myself, hey guys, wait a minute. I'm still Googling that acronym here. Can you just give me a minute? Because the 3-letter words that I thought you were talking about isn't the ones that I think you're talking about. Okay, now I'm on track. I'm back with you again. Okay, so that's what XYZ means. Got it. Right, and it's again, bring a little bit of humor into it. Just don't feel like you've got to know everything.
You've got some funny social posts. I was like, I like this guy. You were ripping apart like hotel bathroom. Air conditioning, airlines and everything. I thought to myself, wow, Alan's somebody that I will go add them and follow them after this engagement.
Well, it's funny. I've got a whole rant coming on about Peloton, to be honest with you, because again, you look at this from the perspective of, if you were the engineer or the CTO of Peloton, what would you be advising to your executive leadership? And that's always a great what if game to play, right? Because you're putting yourself into those shoes and there's problems all over the space. And one of the things that I'm sure you're finding a lot yourself, we've gone through an awful lot of cyclic waves. I mean, last year it was crypto, previous year was blockchain, then it was big data, then it was Web 2.0. Everything is AI now, right? And when you scratch the surface, you realize, okay, it's not AI. You're just calling ChatGPT's API. That does not make you an API company. It makes you a consumer of API, so let's not pretend otherwise. But it seems to be that new frontier whereby there's like another layer of intimidation for another layer for people to get that sort of imposter syndrome, thinking, I haven't kept up with AI. Crap, I feel behind. I should be doing something in this space. And sometimes you just got to sort of step back and hold your hand up. And that's why I do certain posts like that, is to let people know that, hey, I have no clue about this space, and that's okay. I'm still getting a paycheck at the end of every day just because I don't know. Blah. So be comfortable sort of in your own environment. And I have a whole chapter on that, which is You Inc., which is figuring out your own value, your own worth, and not feeling stressed about waking up and suddenly feeling the world has moved on, because, hey, Buttercup, that's got to happen. We're in an industry that redefines itself every 5 years. What you were taught at university, I am not using whatsoever when I graduated as an embedded engineer 35 years ago. So I have to keep learning. This is what I do. And this is what excites me, but it doesn't mean I have to know everything about the computing space.
Let's do some rapid fire best advice for first-time CTOs.
Okay.
What do you got for them?
Listen a lot. Listen to your counterparts, i.e. all the other C-levels in your organization. Learn what their problems are, what keeps them up at night, what's their stresses, what their goals are, and learn about your own team's stresses. Do you really know what your team is struggling with? Have you got a true virtual open door environment where somebody can come in and say, hey, I need this help? The other great piece of advice I'd give is find a strong right hand. Find that one person that you can truly trust. I have that one person. He's been with me for nearly 15 years now. And he's the guy that will effectively shut the door after a meeting and say, what the hell was that? He's never gonna give me the feedback in front of everybody else, but he's gonna come in and say, yeah, probably could have said that better. And I listen and I value his counsel. Right. And that a strong right hand, I cannot put enough weight behind.
Budgeting, would you recommend that for first-time CTOs?
Yes. Get to know your spreadsheet. Your spreadsheet does not have to be complicated. It does not have to be sexy. The most difficult formula you need in that spreadsheet is sum, but just list everything. Everything from that one balsamic subscription that one person is using right through to the Azure or AWS bill that's on that. Every single line item. Get to know your numbers. Be comfortable with your numbers. Don't be intimidated by your numbers, because the CFO's got the exact same numbers. He knows exactly, or she knows exactly what you're spending, but you should be able to tell them what you're spending. And likewise, same with the salaries. Know the salaries of every single person in your group. Know what the market value is. So when it comes to appraisal time of the year and you're trying to fight the CFO for a 5% increase or a 3% increase, whatever it is that you feel that each person deserves, you're not there just to simply dole out money for the sake of it. You're not Santa Claus, but you're there doing it based on merit, and you're there doing it based on what that's going to do to your budget.
And then what advice do you have for technical leaders, like staying out of the weeds? Like if you see your team going to make a decision and you know that this decision is going to explode, do you step in or do you let them fail on their own?
You sort of put sort of guardrails around them, that you let them stumble as much as possible without making too much of a problem so they can learn from it. You want to be able to let them play it out to a certain level so you can sort of say, okay, what I call a teaching moment, let's talk about how you presented that. As a person coming in cold, what do you think you communicated there? Well, I did blah, 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 blah. I said, yeah, no, you didn't. A non-technical person had no clue what that particular thing that you just described. What does that mean? So, okay, well, we've decided we're going to make the API, we're going to make the platform all API driven. Okay, great. But what's the talking point for the CEO? What does that now allow them to do? And part of the sort of advice I give when you're thinking about that is, you're not explaining it to the CEO. Get that out of your head. What you're doing is you're explaining it to the CEO in such a way that they can then explain it to their board and their counterparts. You're giving them the talking points that they can then make it into their own words and their own phrases. So when they talk confidently to the board or outside customers, that they're talking about it in a comfortable, confident, comes across as, hey, you know what you're talking about manner, as opposed to you're parroting somebody else's words and you really have no clue what you are saying there, because our body language betrays us when we're in that sort of scenario. So as you sort of figure out your own language, as you figure out how do I talk to my non-technical engineering colleagues, you're giving them an education on how best that they do that. And it's okay to sort of jump into stuff and say, and I use a lot of analogies a lot when I'm explaining this sort of stuff, because again, everybody loves a good analogy. We can get ourselves around a good analogy. Sometimes the analogy takes off in a world of its own. You're thinking, okay, we're spending way too much time arguing over the logistics of a certain analogy here. I think we've missed the point. Let's bring it back here again. But ultimately, you're trying to be that fountain of knowledge, that fountain of trust, whereby the CEO feels, or any C-level feels like, I can come and have a closed door conversation with you and not be felt like an idiot because I've asked you what you probably will feel like a dumbassery question.
Yeah, I do that by mistake a lot. By like that last part that you said, where like I'll ask a question and then they'll feel like an idiot because they'll start to answer it and they'll be like, "Oh, I made a mistake." So you have to do that softly sometimes.
Yeah, I do the same thing with, I'll many times in my career I've sort of gone into the CFO's office, shut the door, and said, "Right, this EBITDA they keep talking about, what the hell is this all about?" And there's some phrases that keep coming up that I've had to, sit down and say, okay, I have no clue. I have not gone through finance school. I have not gone through business school. I'm a technologist. What the hell does this mean? Give it to me in dumbass terms.
Yeah. Yeah. The entrepreneurship helps cut a lot of these corners to be a great CTO from the business side, because when you're operating a small business, you have to understand the P&Ls, you have to understand cash, you have to understand customers. Like when you were talking a minute ago about telling a story in a way that it's useful for them to repeat that story, we learned that when we were selling into Fortune 1000s. So the person that we would be on a call with, they never let you come like talk to their team. They're like, "Oh, I'll field this and then I'm gonna sell it to my team." Well, it turns out a lot of them suck at selling because they're not salespeople, right? And they're just whatever marketing people for us. And so what we learned to do, we didn't get upset about that. We recognized where we were losing a certain amount of business, and we instead changed our pitch to only focus on the 2 or 3 things that they're going to repeat later versus like how we do it and why it's like all this stuff. We just really focused on, here's the opportunity, here is the cost associated, here's how you can measure it, and here's examples of people that have done it before. Just like just a very few number of things. So then they would take that like one sheet back to their team, and then they could have that one conversation to get us into a meeting to talk with everybody. And so we learned that. And I think that skill is applicable right to your C-level peers, right? If you're going to go talk to your CEO, they're going to go back and talk with the board or their internal advisory network that they have set up within their, friend group.
Yeah. And that's before we even talk. I mean, that's a whole other podcast, is how do you talk to the board level? I mean, and those are people that are not involved in the day-to-day of the company. So you've got golfing. A level of abstraction from that perspective, that you've got to sort of decode some of the company language in such a way that your board members or your investors can truly understand why and what you're trying to achieve. Yes,
and they are usually the most macro, like the board members. Yeah,
and they think everything's simple.
Well, it is, because they have no details of the underlying problems, which is what I do. People call me up and they're like, "Hey, I've got this problem." I was like, "Well, that sounds simple, but I bet it's not."
Yeah. Yeah. Where's the detail in this, people? Where's the detail?
Yeah. Well, this is great. We're going to give away a copy of the book. So, Josh, what is the giveaway requirements? How do people win a free copy of Think Like a CTO by the great and powerful Alan Williamson?
Yeah, so people can send an email over to josh@moderncto.io and include your favorite advice from this episode. We'll pick 2 of you to win a copy of Alan's book.
Nice.
Thank you, Josh.
Awesome. We did it. Alan, they can buy the book on Amazon. I think that's where I found it, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Joel, this was an absolute pleasure, and I'm humbled to spend an hour with you.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this episode useful, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would get value from it. And if you have topics that you'd like to hear discussed on the podcast, either add me on LinkedIn or send me an email, joel@moderncto.io. Every time I get an email or LinkedIn message, it absolutely makes my day and inspires me to keep going.